When you ask a citizen of Teyvat who they think is amongst the apex of authority and power, several names come to mind. If their names aren't amongst the 7 archons who watch over the land, chances are they'll turn to the 11 strangest and ruthless devoted followers of the motherland. 10? No, 9. 9 strange and ruthless devoted followers. Anyway, so today, welcome to the How Strong Are the Genshin Characters. Let's talk about Teyvat's favorite clown fiesta, the Fatui Harbingers. Now, before I begin, a quick plug of my Patreon or YouTube memberships. Join the Wind Wheels now and support the channel. Anyway, let's get back to the video. I'll be breaking down the characters' notable abilities, assets, intelligence, feats, and achievements that make them formidable, and I'll be covering everything that I can under the sun. As a disclaimer, we have only had 4 Harbingers make a formal appearance in the game, therefore leaving us with only speculation and theories for the other 7. So none of this is confirmed, and I'm just going off on in-game and in-cutscene observations based on what we already know. Additionally, I want to preface that the point of the How Strong series isn't to compare them with each other, but instead to study the character in and of themselves. The problem is that as the lore stands, there has been clear comparison of the 11 Harbingers simply based on word of mouth from reliable sources, so I will take that into account when I make my analyses. And last but certainly not the least, this video will not be talking simply about how they are in a fight, because I do believe strength is cumulative with all kinds of abilities. And this is something that I'll get to later. Anyway, let's begin. In the current lore of Genshin, we know several constants that are mentioned to us about the Harbingers' overall power in terms of mechanical strength. The Harbingers are the linchpins of authority that allow the Fatui to do as they please in the 7 nations. They, politically, economically, and scientifically, are powerhouses that can intimidate most governing bodies into bending into submission by sheer resources alone. The Harbingers aren't like the Akatsuki from Naruto who are simply powerful for the sake of being powerful, but they're manipulators, soldiers, scientists, leaders, and the worst scum of them all, politicians. The Harbingers are each given delusions in which they hold as a badge of honor. The delusions are the source and the proof of the Harbingers' immense power. Source because the delusion allows them to use other elements to fuel their existing capabilities or combat existing weaknesses that may jeopardize their well-being. And proof because wielding a delusion in and of itself takes a horrendous toll on your body. Furthermore, these delusions are expected to be of the highest potency and quality because they come from an archon that has fashioned it herself. We can also infer that each of the Harbingers have an ability or a feature that has transcended humanity. Some have abyssal powers, some are divine, some are of a race that has yet to be known to us, and some are really rich. But now we dive into them as individual characters, and with that, let's start with Tartaglia. Tartaglia himself is the character that is horrendously strong by regular human standards, but compared to the Harbingers, even he admits that he pales in comparison. Which, if you have more than one person in your roster being older than your bloodline, I can see what he means. But by no feat is Tartaglia weak in his own regard. While Tartaglia lacks the years of experience to completely hone his abilities, he makes up for this in his speed and willingness to learn. Tartaglia is proficient in all forms of weapons, with his expertise being the dual blades and his spear, and the bow being his weakest. However, despite him being the weakest at the bow, he is still able to fight with rigor and isn't afraid to use it in a serious battle. Tartaglia's vision is hydro and he is proficient in creating melee weapons, creatures, and bursts of hydro energy. His delusion, on the other hand, is Electro, which greatly enhances his speed and agility while giving him a tremendous boost in melee combat. And his final form is the Foul Legacy, a form that he gained after 3 Abyssal months or 3 Teyvatian days in training. This form is able to morph his body and enhance both his constitution and dexterity by a massive boost, all the while providing short-term teleportation, bursts area of effects, and massive piercing and shredding attacks that can break through a wide area. Tartaglia's piercing attacks alone were able to decimate the floor of the Golden House. Tartaglia himself acknowledges that compared to the other Harbingers, he's not at the same degree, and that's evident in how quickly he becomes lethargic. He's clearly inexperienced with his own power despite his previous training, and does have years ahead of him. The drawbacks of using his Foul Legacy for even a few seconds or minutes are clear with the recovery period needed after the Liyue Archon quest, followed by his fight with the Ruin Guards. However, if he's able to improve on his strength, we are potentially seeing movesets similar to the Abyss Herald. Considering the similarities of Tartaglia and the Abyss Herald's movesets and the naming conventions having ties in their names, we can garner that Tartaglia's final capabilities are at the same resilience and speed as the Herald's. He might even be able to form shields eventually based on both Electro and Hydro infusions, or just have wider attacks. In terms of political authority and pursuit, Tartaglia admits he has the lowest level of authority amongst the Harbingers, yet is still a very capable negotiator and businessman. Tartaglia is well-traveled and has understood the art of politics despite claiming he's not as manipulative as his other comrades. While he does say that, Tartaglia's ability to garner information and execute on intel is at a very dangerous level. Arlecchino, the Knave. Her ranking is currently unknown, but that's not necessarily what matters at the moment. Arlecchino is best known for her assets of leadership and the potential of creating soldiers from orphans and indoctrinating them into the Fatui's ideal loyalty. But we do know that Arlecchino's best interests are, according to Tartaglia, for her own benefit, and that she is insane for even considering such insolence. Regardless of her motivations though, her strength is what we have yet to fully grasp. Her title, the Knave, might give us a deeper dive into what she could potentially be in terms of power. The Knave is known as a dishonest or unscrupulous man, which pairs well with Tartaglia's voice lines, but it's also another term in card play for the Jack. A Jack can be another term for soldier, and a very popular knave in literature is from Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, the Knave of Hearts. While the book Knave wasn't much of a character, the Knave of Hearts from Tim Burton's movie resembles a commander-like character that demands respect from his subordinates and uses a sword. Additionally, it's unknown if Arlecchino herself has a vision, but it would be nice if her character has something to do with either Pyro or Electro. These are two offensive elements, and we have yet to see a Pyro Delusion from the current roster. As far as we're also aware, she's a human being, so she might have additional augments similar to La Signora or Tartaglia. The X marking in her irises and the lack of glint might suggest that she is far more than what she seems. Or it's just possible that her true assets come in the form of her authority in training Fatui soldiers at a very young age, making her less of a soldier and more so a character focused on the logistics side of managing the Fatui, much like Pantalone. That's really all we can speculate from her at the moment, and out of all the other Harbingers, I'm actually super curious what she can do. Pantalone, the Regrader. Speaking of humans who were artificially augmented, now we move on to Pantalone. Pantalone canonically doesn't have a vision as far as we are aware. His lore in the Pale Flame suggests that the gods have never looked upon him with favor, and that he was destitute. His biggest strength lies in his ability to control the potential economies of not only Snezhnaya, but also other nations. Pantalone's feats and achievements come in the fact that he has made Snezhnaya to be one of the biggest economic powerhouses in Tevat, with trade and wealth being almost dispensable for the Harbingers. We know that what makes the Fatui strong are their resources, and nations like Liyue and Mondstadt don't have both the technology or the materials to compete with them. His power over the other nations is much more subtle but concrete. He was the one who rented the entirety of the Goth Hotel, the largest hotel in Mondstadt, for the Fatui. And furthermore, Pantalone was also eyeing Mondstadt's wine industry to see if he can have a hold on Mondstadt's largest market. We also know that the Northland Bank, one of Liyue's top establishments, was created by Pantalone's efforts. A bank in the land of commerce is definitely no easy feat. Pantalone's economic genius is not only for the sake of the Fatui's prosperity, but also for the monopolization of important businesses in other nations, which is in and of itself a really big power move. Pantalone is an amazing strategist as well, able to predict Yelan's moves, for example, to stop her from jeopardizing their entire operation. Now, we move on to his more combat capabilities. Pantalone has no lore currently about his delusion or his fighting style, but I can see him being Geo or Hydro given his ambitions. Geo, not only for Mora, but also to symbolize his hard, fast, and practical nature in terms of dealing with his hard work. On the other hand, Hydro is a conjuration element, which could symbolize his ability to generate boundless wealth for the Fatui. Signora, the Fair Lady. Signora's strength in the game is laid out for us in her boss fight and in her artifact sets. While it isn't actually said which branch she graduated from, Signora might have been a graduate of the branch dealing with elementalism. Signora is also capable of speaking 20 languages, as Alhaitham says that all graduates need to leave the academia with at least 20 language proficiencies. She doesn't have a known vision on her if we look at her model, and it's hinted that her pyromancy far exceeds the limitations of the vision, giving her longevity. Signora has a lifespan of an inhuman, with her estimated age being around more than 500 years old. Signora was also potentially a victim of abyssal corruption, considering the proximity she would have had fighting them, and the severe toll it seemed to take on her human form was pretty much evident. Signora's delusion is cryo, and we need to understand the role of this as opposed to someone like Tartaglia's. When using her cryo abilities, Signora opts for long-range combat with a protective barrier around herself, almost similar to how she approaches Venti in the Mondstadt Archon quest. Signora immobilizes, pierces, or bursts her enemies down with little to no movement on her end. Signora's Cryo Delusion was used to suppress the Crimson Witch, meaning that her core power is much higher and much more volatile than Tartaglia's. She gains greater mobility and size, while also imbuing her form with resistances, enhanced constitution and durability, and an overall control of pyromancy. It doesn't seem like she's able to control both her cryo and pyro form at the same time, but given that this is a boss fight, this might not really be the case in the lore. A feature of hers that has yet to be explained, though, are the crystal flies that emitted from her during her fight, her execution, and her funeral. I wonder what role they'll play in the future. Sandrone, the marionette. Sandrone is another character that we can only vaguely scratch the surface of. She's amongst the characters that I sincerely doubt is human, considering her name and her aesthetic. Sandrone has resemblances to those Victorian-era dolls with frilly dresses and headbands to match. What is fascinating, though, is her intellect. Sandrone has knowledge of ruin guards and has the ability to manipulate them as she wishes, as we see in the trailer. It's also possible that her research into artificial beings would direct her to Catherine, a Snezhnayan mechanical entity in charge of the Adventurers Guild. It's important to consider that there is no proof Catherine is Sandrone's creation, but I do think that Sandrone wouldn't dare pass up an opportunity to study something as complex as Catherine, considering her title and her apparent expertise in inorganic creatures. Which would actually be pretty funny considering there's a literal puppet in her team, but I digress. Sandrone may be an inorganic creature that was once human but altered herself to the point of becoming doll-like, but considering there is nothing conclusive and we know the least about her, we can simply guess. What we do know for certain is that she is as much of a researcher as the Dore. Take that as you will. Scaramouche, the Balladeer. The Balladier's power is one constantly repeated throughout the story of Sumeru. He is capable of Electrokinesis as his base powers given by an unsealed bit of Fatui. The Balladeer is also an inorganic entity, meaning that his faculties for basic human needs might not be existent at all. It's possible that he has no need for sleep or eating, but does it as a pastime. There's hardly any proof about this, though. Scaramouche is also capable of living for extended periods of time with no signs of aging. His history would also indicate that Scaramouche has proficiency, if not expertise, in blacksmithing, considering that he has a past with blacksmithers and may have been able to manipulate or sabotage the Raiden Gokuren's works. Now, as for the false god's body, it's difficult to say if the delusion that was given to him covers all the elements as we see in the boss fight, or if the fact that he has multiple elements was just a temporary boost given by his new body. But nevertheless, the diversity of Scaramouche's new body allows for numerous combinations and reactions. What was even more fascinating, though, is the use of a Gnosis as a tool. While we do see that the Gnosis is stored within his chest, we need to understand that it was because Scaramouche desperately reached out and connected himself to the tubes in the back that he completely deactivated in the first place. We don't actually know to what extent the Gnosis empowered his attacks, but we can say it's substantial enough to warrant the thunderstorms and the galactic level abilities he achieved here. What I am curious, though, is the creation of the robot itself. If the robot was Dotore's creation solely, or Scaramouche had a hand in deciding which aspects of the robot would be most favorable for him. Guess we'll never find out, honestly. Considering that we're talking about Scaramouche and not the Wanderer, I won't be considering his animal vision for this video, but I'll most likely cover it in the future. Now we move on to the first 5 Harbingers. I'll have varying degrees of theories for each of the top 5 Harbingers. But nevertheless, let's begin. Pulcinella, the Rooster. Pulcinella's rank is very much fascinating considering his stature doesn't necessarily command immediate power, not like Scaramouche, Signora, or Tartaglia. However, there has to be a reason that this man is the 5th. Pulcinella's race seems to be somewhat inhuman, with his pointy ears like Klee and a really long nose similar to his Commedia dell'arte mask. Given his short stature, a part of me wants to believe that he is Genshin's alternative to a Goblinoid or a Hobbit. While his powers are a mystery, his authority is unquestioned with the Fatui. Seeing a genuinely old character in Genshin that doesn't look like an NPC is genuinely refreshing, but I actually think that Pulcinella is much older than he looks. Considering that races with pointed ears in Genshin tend to expand past human lifespans, I actually think that Pulcinella is centuries, if not thousands of years old, if his race is inhuman, that is. As for his delusion, it's impossible to say, but I like to believe that he has the Cryo Delusion, for no reason other than I think it would suit him, honestly. Capitano, the Captain. The Captain is another figure that we have yet to meet, but there is one thing absolutely fascinating about him. He is known as an ordinary mortal, at least from what we know. Both Grandmaster Varka and Tartaglia admire this man as a warrior, and Varka doesn't doubt that the Captain can take out a ruin guard with Klee's crayons. What's fascinating about Capitano is how mundane he allegedly is. While he does have a delusion, his fighting style is most likely a close-range claymore-using warrior that relies on brute force. The problem though with Capitano's characterization is the use of ordinary mortal. We know that some people in the Fatui could have started as ordinary mortals, yet have been morphed by unknown circumstances. All this considered, they do still look mortal enough, and it's really hard to trust Varka's perspective on Capitano when in reality, he hasn't even seen his face. We can only rely on a vague claim, so it is what it is, honestly. Columbina, the Damselet. Now, a creature that rivals the gods. The last 3 Harbingers are people that Nahida considers as on par with divinity, and their strengths are unparalleled by most. Columbina is the 3rd Fatui Harbinger. She's someone that even Child is particularly wary of, and it's that unsettling feeling that he gets that really sets him on edge. Columbina's design and the pin on her hair first reminds me of a seraph, the 6 wings being a clear characterization of such. A fan theory by Reddit user Ryan Chill actually considered that Columbina may be a Seelie because of her seemingly angelic features and the fact that she sings a mournful tale. I won't be going into full detail of this, but essentially, Ryan broke down the story of the drunkard's tale and history of the Seelie kingdom. There was a mention of a maiden who would bow her head and sing mournful melodies about a bygone kingdom. Now, I did some digging myself and began investigating the Seelie Courts, and what's fascinating are the discrete parallels between the court and Columbina's design. The markings at the bottom resemble her mask, the wings on Columbina's head being the wings on the statue. Seraphs are also known to sing in the court of the gods, thus we have the really popular church song, Holy, Holy, Holy. And even the mysterious patterns on her headband resemble the smaller designs on the court. I do think it's a pretty fascinating one considering the wariness both Tartaglia and Nahida share for the 3rd Harbinger. If I want to theorize on Columbina's strength, I need to look at what even are a seraph and a Seelie. Let's start with the Seraphim. If Columbina is in fact a seraph, her primary element wouldn't be something that we have seen in the playable characters, but instead, radiance, similar to the celestial energy we saw in 2.6 and 2.1. Seraphim are divine, and they praise the revelation of God. They are known for their ardor or fire, and they kindle and purify with an all-consuming flame, and cleanse with a radiant and enlightening power. A seraph's will is to destroy the shadows of the darkness. A Seelie, on the other hand, in fantasy mythology, are fae-like creatures. They're essentially woodland beings with the affinity to life magic, almost similar to the prospect of Dendro. A great example of a member of the Seelie Court is a creature known as Titania, or the Fairy Queen. She is a powerful mental manipulator and is able to charm, guias, and manipulate people that would get too close to her. It's possible that Columbina's strength lies in a much more sinister, yet all the more divine history. Dottore, the Doctor. His power doesn't just come with quality, but also quantity. The amount of work in progress that Dottore does or has done with his segments expands the workload and productivity of the Fatui by a long shot. Dottore was a student of the academia before his expulsion, and is mostly feared for his wits. I'll be starting with the regular Dottores and make my way to the Whip Dottore considering they're practically 2 different characters. Regular Dottore, or at least a mega build, has access to extensive knowledge spanning across decades or even centuries. Dottore has successfully split his life into multiple homunculi, and is most likely the perpetrator of any weapon, delusion, and technological advancement in the Fatui. He also has knowledge about ruin guards, Celestia, and otherworldly entities considering the information he gave to Nahida. Combat-wise, Web Dottore doesn't seem to be a pushover, which would suggest that the real Dottore would have body augmentations that assist him in combat. After all, this is the man that suggested the overall modification of human bodies to create God. I don't doubt that during the apex of his scientific endeavors, he considered giving his own buffs to himself. I wonder if at that point you can even consider Dottore human. Piero, the Jester. The Jester was known for his immense charisma and ability to persuade not only his foot soldiers, but also his Harbingers to join the cause. This one is going to be a fascinating breakdown. The Jester, first and foremost, may have the curse of immortality considering his origins. Should he be from Conria, then that means he's several centuries old. And also considering that fact, it is a curiosity if he has the powers of a Conrian. Conrian technology and powers are an enigma in our lore considering that they're not formally listed as a conventional element. Dane's element, for example, is unknown to us despite being listed. It's possible that the Jester plays by the same rules and has another element completely outside of the current 7. In terms of strength though, it's also possible that the Jester is an abyssal creature. If Columbina is my theoretical Fae-like angel, Piero could easily be something that is wearing the skin of a human, but is nothing short of a monster once his final form kicks in. We know that the original people of Conria were turned into what they are now, and we also know that abyssal creatures are able to don human disguises. I wonder if Piero also goes through that same transformation. We can never be too certain, but it's still a fascinating thought. Now, before I end this video, here's a mini theory. The Polar Star lore is one of my favorite hints of the Harbingers, and I'm going to break it down based on who I think each line was for. Oft have we walked in the moonless night could be a reference to Columbina, if she truly was an angelic being that mourns for the calamity that befell her kingdom. Oft have we trudged through the gilded sands could be a reference to Dottore and his expulsion from the academia as a heretic. Oft have we felt piercing enmity in the dark could be a reference to Tartaglia for his 3 months in the abyss. And oft have we dream of lovers in distant hometown could be a reference to Signora for her lost love. If your dreams find no acceptance would be for Scaramouche regarding his dreams never coming to fruition. If you nurse wounds that would never fade, maybe for Sandrone considering her entire motif is puppetry and artificiality. If you end up discontent each day, maybe a reference to Pantalone considering that he was once destitute and despised the gods who gave him nothing. If you burn with fury against false promises, maybe for Arlecchino considering her title as the Knave. Of course, nothing here is indicative of the facts. And that's a wrap. Oh boy, that was pretty long, but a really fun thought experiment. Anyway, I'm personally excited to see what happens now that more Harbingers are being shown, and that the whole roster has been dropped. But that's it for me. My name is Aster, and thank you for chilling with me.